this is Jennifer Smith, True Love Scam Recovery, Narcissistic Abuse Unwound. Today, I have a guest. I have Phoebe with us. She's going to share her experience of being under the spell of coercive control. Before we totally get into this, I do want to say I'm using new software I've never used before. Part of this is recorded in my normal DAW, my recording software, and some of it is on a platform called Riverside FM, and I'm learning my way through it. It is not going to be perfect audio. So that said, let us begin with Phoebe. Welcome, Phoebe. Thank you so much for being part of this Narcissistic Abuse Unwound. Why don't you start out by telling everyone, how did you meet this person or entity or creature, however you think of it, that brought you here?
Yeah, so we met through, I guess, what some people would consider, when it comes to dating, it's a more old-fashioned way. We met through a mutual shared connection. This shared connection was a sort of a mentor for me at a previous company I'd worked for. And then this connection knew this person and their family. And we all were living in relatively the same city. And so this connection, him and his family, they were getting ready to relocate. So they had a going away party. And I was invited to the party. And I found out after the fact that it was not only just a party, but it was also a setup. I didn't know that it was going to be a setup, but the shared connection and the guy, they knew it was. So the shared connection wanted the two of us to meet. He thought that we would be a match, and that's how we met. We exchanged numbers. We talked for a little bit at this party. Nothing crazy. It was a progression. It was a slow process. Once I left the party, I actually didn't hear from him for a solid 2 weeks. Reflecting back on our initial meeting, we both agreed that we wanted to develop a friendship before anything else. So we met and we did innocent things like meeting up to do yoga or having coffee or having a drink. We did that for a few months, and then eventually it turned into a romantic relationship.
So you felt very safe and you trusted it. And why wouldn't you? Introduced by friends. What was going on in your life, I would say, maybe when you met this person and right before you met them?
I feel like I was living a version of a young professional life. I had just moved to one of the biggest cities in the country, in the US. I was working in the corporate world. I was supporting myself, and in my mind, kind of just doing my thing. I was working. I was getting out and about, meeting people, exploring hobbies, exploring the cities in my late 20s in a big city.
That sounds beautiful, doesn't it? You were feeling good. You had things going on. Your life was moving along, and you meet this
Mhm.
person through friends. And we all have expectations of what a relationship means, what that is, what that's going to be. And as you guys took it slowly, which is a little bit unusual for this kind of setup, this is really interesting for people to hear. What happens when there isn't that buzzing contact every day? This went on at a different kind of pace. What did you expect as you were ramping up into this? What were you thinking it would be? What were you maybe promised through exact words from this other person? Or just those ideas we have in our head of what a relationship is?
Yeah, it's interesting, and something you said triggered, bringing me back to that initial meeting. Anybody who's even just read your articles and has maybe done some sessions with you, you often kind of say that they kind of, in their own way, they stun you. And I actually remember very vividly, like the moment that I saw him walk up the stairs into the room where the party was. And he struck me right away just because he was very handsome and very athletic. I've been an athlete pretty much my whole life. And so that was something I think that's always going to be important to me. But he was just very striking, very handsome. And So yeah, I think it's interesting. Like maybe I was stunned from that moment onwards, right? But then there was this sort of atypical, like slow burn or like slow progression into what ended up being a relationship or scam. But my expectations, it's interesting because, and even now, I don't quite know how I feel about marriage. I used to think I had a strong idea about it. And actually, so if I bring myself back to that age, which was almost a decade ago, I definitely had this idea that I wasn't rushing to get married. I wasn't necessarily rushing to find someone just for the sake of getting married, but I was willing to be patient for the person that I thought I'd want to get married to. I had dated people before him. I'd had good experiences, bad experiences, the sort of spectrum of experiences. It's funny when you ask about expectations. I remember even having a conversation with a girlfriend at the time and kind of being like, in that 2-week period between first meeting and then when he texted me 2 weeks later, I actually thought for a little while that he wasn't even interested. And it was funny. I had a girlfriend say, well, just because he's not like clamoring to have sex with you right away doesn't mean he's like not interested. And I'm like, okay, and I kind of took that into consideration. And so I think, and maybe that is like one of the things that kind of also caught me in a way is sort of this different experience. I guess because we did have this slow progression and I did appreciate it. Like we didn't have sex for, I don't know, a good like 4 or 5 or 6, well, maybe not 6 months, but it was a while, like after, we'd been, meeting up and hanging out. And the first year that we were together, he would come a lot to my apartment and we would hang out there and go from there and explore the city. But at some point around that year or so mark, I remember him making a comment, like kind of alluding to the possibility that we could get married one day. And my like initial like visceral reaction was, I think I was glad that he said that, but I still wasn't like, I wasn't going to rush into it. So, but I kind of like, it was kind of something that like I filed away in the back of my head. But I think like neither of us were ready to, like, we weren't going to rush that in any way. So I think what I expected from meeting this person and how it sort of developed is that I did think that eventually we were going to get married. And then of course the years went on and that didn't happen. We were really together romantically for 7.5 years.
So where did it start to feel odd? When do you remember seeing or hearing him say something or do something that seemed unusual?
Yeah, so for the first year that we were together, he would come to my apartment a lot. And then about a year or so into dating, he had enough money to buy a house. So he bought a house and we moved in together. And I would say, thinking like feeling back into that time space, there was definitely a sort of trigger, I think, with just the stress of moving into a new home for the first time. I saw the side of him that was just sort of stressed out and distant. And from that point, I don't know. Yeah, it's like the mask definitely started falling off and his anger started showing. And there was definitely an instance where he was annoyed or upset with me about something. And that's when the verbal abuse started happening. He also, and I think I've talked with you about this in our calls, but I read a lot and I've definitely read a lot about like psychology is like just throughout my life. And so how he was behaving, I thought that he had Asperger's because he would sort of have these, I noticed that he was like very, very structured, very regimented. And then it's like he was having problems regulating his emotions, especially anger. So that's what really, when I think back and feel into that time, like sort of this lack of being able to manage anger and like outbursts started happening. And I remember specifically one time he would wake up really early to start his day, sometimes before I did. And I just remember there was one morning in particular where he was out in the kitchen and something must have upset him, whether something was out or whatever, and he started slamming cupboards. And it's just scary. Like, and and that is one definition of abuse, like, throwing things, even if they're not throwing them at you, or making really loud, disruptive noises. And so I remember feeling, I think it's when I started feeling the fear. So I was scared. And it must have happened, it must have gone on for a little while. And then finally, I actually said something to him one day. I said, look, I said, you can't keep, slamming cupboards and sort of having these tantrums, and I'm going to have to leave. So, and when I, as I'm saying this out loud with you, it's like, that pattern never really changed, and that pattern persisted for years, definitely throughout our relationship or situationship. Act really badly, have a lot of anger, be really controlling, coercive, and I would sort of let it get to a peak, kind of get past my fear, address him. And sometimes it would be bad enough to where, he would recognize that he was really pushing the limit, and then he would like behave for a couple of days and then go back to it. So yeah, I guess to wrap it all up, it's like, at some point the mask just fell off and that was it.
Yeah. The thing is, each time they slam the cupboards or have an outburst, there's a reason for it, for that they know about, that we don't know about. Like the day that you found him up unexpectedly early slamming cupboards, the first one you were maybe mentioning. He could have been cut off by somebody else that you didn't know about and be mad about that. Be worried they're going to contact you, family members or parents or his boss, or, do something that would tear apart what he had built, this house of cards life, such as it was. It can easily be blown over. And they're on the lookout for that all the time. So another reason they can have those bursts is the outbursts can be motivated by something very, very simple. Something we said that it required something of them, expected something of them, challenged them. Why are you doing it that way? Why were you late? Why didn't you pick up your phone? That can bring an outburst because the simple thing they truly want in that moment is for us to shut up. And I would imagine every time he was slamming cupboards, you shut up because that's normal. It's a normal response, right?
Yeah.
So there's always something going on. It isn't, I don't know how to say, random abuse, right? There's a reason for them. There's things going on in their lives that we don't know about. And then the other underlying thing is they can't stand us in general. They're annoyed that we're there, that they have to be there with us, even though he brought you there into the house. So I doubt that that was something, you would have expected out of a relationship. And, that was definitely a shortfall, like a disappointment, and surprising and confusing. And it is traumatic for sure.
I want to add something really quickly. As you were saying that, it brought something to the service that I forgot about. So it was like that first year, and even the first couple of years, I would say, and anybody that I've talked to about this is that, like, yeah, for me, like, it was like fantasy life. I'd found my fantasy man. We were living the good life, double income, no kids, like living in a big city, enjoying it. But especially like that first year, it was all, fun and games, just coming to my apartment and we go around the city and explore. And then, like I said, there was a change that happened when we moved into the house. And you said the thing specifically about, them feeling annoyed that you're there. And I remember now, and like you said, who knows what else was going on in his world. I remember that, we moved into the house, and it was as if he just worked at his job overtime. He was actually out of the house at a physical location. And it was like he just went into overtime and it felt like I never saw him. And in fact, I even had a family member come visit me. This family member was waiting with me one night for him to come home. And even the family member said, like, wow, like kind of something along the lines of like, you deserve someone who who wants to spend time with you. So it's just you saying that, like that just triggered like a memory. Like you're so right. And I remember in addition to that, he made a comment like he said something like, "Oh, I'm not abandoning you," but like essentially, like that's what he was doing, right? Like he was abandoning me. Like he just bought this house, but he's like spending all this time at work. Wow, so interesting. That was a good
Yeah.
prompt.
Yeah. Two things there. The thing that your friend said, wow, you deserve someone who wants to spend time with you. That kind of comment is exactly why they separate prey. That would be you, Phoebe, or me in my story, from our friends and our family. They don't want someone else pointing out normal and the abnormal that they are
Mm,
offering or blowing up anything that's going to ruin their setup. And
mhm,
was he at work? And the reason he used the word, I'm not abandoning you, is because people in the past, other people like you, or people maybe the week before, somebody said to him, maybe the morning the cupboards were slamming, he got a message from somebody you don't know about that thought that this guy was their boyfriend or fiance or husband or whatever. And they said, I feel like you're abandoning me. Where are you? I don't know where you are all the time. Why don't you answer my calls? Or whatever level of, description they put in that. But those kind of terms, I'm not abandoning you. I would never lie to you. They get those ideas of those behaviors from us, from people around them who's challenged them really with, where are you all the time? It's like, I feel like I'm abandoned. Or, you get the idea. You can fill
mm,
in the verb. You're neglecting me. Where were you? It was my birthday. They always forget our birthdays. Those are meaningless to them. They ignore them.
oh gosh. Yeah,
Yeah.
he forgot my birthdays. I remember I was so hurt. I was so hurt, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So you guys lived together. One of the really big pieces of this that is talk about hurtful is around the bedroom, sex, right? And
Mhm,
I've discovered from talking to people and my own experience, if, you live with them or you're married to them, that is very often abandoned. There is no more sex. They might even start sleeping in a separate room or sleeping on the couch. Or it's the opposite. We become a kind of object that they use sexually. So you don't have to go into any kind of details specifically, but was there disappointment and shortfalls or even danger in that department when you were living together?
yeah, absolutely. This is such an important topic, and I'm surprised it hasn't come up in our in our sessions. But I want to. There's a few things I want to say here, just because I think it's so important for other people to hear. So, again, I was definitely. I felt like I was definitely in this high. After starting this relationship with him, first couple of years. Again, I would say like, yeah, I found my fantasy man. I'm like living the dream life. Like things are great. And things that pertain to our sex life as well. Like, and I remember, so the first, whatever it was, couple of years, we even would talk to each other and say like, wow, like we have a really great sex life and it's really great. And we're so lucky because we know that's like, there's a lot of, some people like this maybe never get to experience that. And so we were like, it felt like we were like on this high together. Like we just connected really well. And then when things changed, for lack of better words, that changed as well in its own way. So short point, you mentioned sleeping in separate bedrooms. So at first we did sleep together in the same bed. We shared a room. And then eventually it turned into, your snoring is upsetting me. Like, then, so basically it was, he kind of ordered us to separate and to sleep in separate beds. So he slept in the original bed that we were in. And then I moved into the spare bedroom, and that's where I slept at night. When it came to the actual sex, like, it's a pattern that I sort of noticed after the fact, like reflecting and looking back. It turned into feeling less mutual and more so everything was on his terms and his timing. So, and there was very little spontaneity. In fact, I don't even remember in those last years, especially ever trying to initiate, like it wouldn't have ever worked if I would have initiated it, but like it was always on his terms. So eventually he was working remotely full time from home. And this was the typical thing that would happen after a couple of years, is that if I happened to be home in the late afternoon from work, say around the time window of like 2 to 3 p.m., and he happened to have a break in between meetings, he would feel like doing it, and he'd be like knocking on the door, like, "Hey, and and I would go along with it because on one hand I wanted it, on the other hand, like there wasn't much like build up or sort of romanticism to it. And then eventually I actually started to feel resentful. And that connects back to the whole marriage thing. So going back to that, at some point we were starting to have a conversation where it was like, okay, are we going to get married? I wanted to, I thought. And then for him, it turned into like his opinion change. It turned from like, we'll probably get married one day. And then as time went on, there were like more and more reasons for us not to get married. And so I ended up feeling resentful because I conceded a lot. I compromised a lot. Like it went from like, okay, we won't get married. Then let's have a ceremony. Okay, no ceremony. Okay, fine. Then just give me a ring. No, I'm not going to give you a ring. So like I compromised everything away just to like stay with him. And I remember for like a good solid year, I was quite resentful towards him. And like I would have sex with him, but I wouldn't necessarily enjoy it. And so then by the end of like the 7.5 years of being together, it was like so clear to me like how lazy he basically was. It turned into, okay, I'm ready to do it. Come inside the room, take your clothes off, do the things, have the sex, and then get out of the bed. And I remember just like thinking like, wow, like this is so lazy. Like you don't even try to romance me. Like you don't try to get me in the mood. Like it's just like, okay, quite robotic. And there's something, you said something about using or being used, and without going into detail, like there was definitely something that happened in one of our last encounters where what he said expressed that like he could not really connect to love. Like he basically expressed that he could only understand being used or using, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, that makes sense. That's what their
Yeah.
brain is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I took it to mean that he said you snored and told you to
Yeah.
go into the other room.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did that feel? That rejection, or I mean, I don't want to use an emotional terminology that, is trying to express what you felt. I want you, if you can describe really inside your life how that felt to be told go sleep there.
It felt awful. I felt like, I'm someone who hasn't had a lot of family support. And so I've been really independent most of my life. I've put myself through everything. I feel like I'm like a really strong person, but at the end of the day, like you often say, and I'm so thankful that you remind us of this, but I'm a normal human being, and we are designed and wired for to be in companionship and to be in tribes and to be in groups, and to have someone that I thought I loved, and just it was like nice, in my mind it's like nice just like share a bed with someone. You just feel comforted, you feel cared for, you feel safe and secure. And so it really marked a very lonely time in my life. And yeah, I really dealt with that like that was a deep kind of very almost damaging kind of loneliness I felt. And he wasn't a cuddler. Like we did not like even at the end of the day, the nightly routine was, watching the Netflix and after eating dinner, like there wasn't cuddling. And in fact, it's interesting because he actually quite often, especially in the latter part of our relationship, like he quite often made it clear that he knew that like that's like what I needed as a natural person, like just touch and warmth and cuddling. And like he was not that way at all. And he knew that. I think that one of the main things that kept me healthy and alive in that sense is that I engaged in a sport that requires a lot of touch. And there's definitely like humans, we need touch. People become touch deprived, and it does a number on their mental health. And I think that's one of the main things that kept me healthy and sane during that time. But it was awful. I mean, the loneliness that I felt.
Yeah, it's awful. It happened to me too. The weakness that is woken up from somewhere in the depths of our lives, a weakness, a frailty that for me, I didn't even know it existed inside my life, but it was tapped into more and more the longer that, I was with this nutbag, which was a very short time, 11 months. And certain things happen gradually, like finally you're feeling resentment. You're realizing probably that sports at the time, you're realizing and recognizing, wow, this is the place I feel good, not at home where I also ought to feel good. Things happen that lead us finally to thinking about the end. Like, how did I get here? How do I get out of this? And how did that come up? What did you do about it? How did you feel about it? Just if there's any of that you can talk about.
You're asking about the end, like how the end came about?
Well, the slide, anything that comes to your mind, yeah, where it shifts
Yeah.
gears enough that it's like, I live here. We talked about getting married, but maybe not.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely had cognitive dissonance like for a while. I knew I wasn't happy. I knew it wasn't good. But he also knew how to use breadcrumbing, like for sure, and future faking and future promises to kind of, pick me up out of those valleys, this sort of intense valleys and peaks. And there was a lot of intensity in our lives, just, from him and who he is. But um definitely leading up to the pandemic, it was getting worse. Like our conflicts were becoming worse. The bizarre situations were becoming worse. But I felt stuck. And yeah, I felt pinned. I didn't know how to end it. I didn't know where to go. Again, like I don't have a great family support system. And I had friends, but no one that, like needed a roommate, you know.
Yeah.
So then the pandemic happens, and then it's like everyone's locked in because, you know, and that's when things really got worse because then I lost my job just like a lot of other people did. I had to go on that long-term unemployment. I lost my job from catching COVID the first wave through. And so we both ended up home, and it was a nightmare. It was really a nightmare because we were fighting a lot. He was really just verbally aggressive, verbally abusive, ranting about all kinds of things all the time. It was really horrible. And then there was one particular night where we had a really big fight, like a really, really big fight. In fact, he even took a laundry basket and slammed it down to the ground and broke it to pieces. Like that's how bad it was. And I remember that night being like, okay, this is it. Like we're done. And I remember leaving. So at the time I was connected to the family WhatsApp chat, and I actually removed myself. And
The family, your family?
his
His
family's
family.
WhatsApp chat. Yeah, and I like to say as if like I mean it, like I'm done, like I'm leaving this crazy situation. And I don't know if it was the next morning, but at the same time that this was happening, I had also had a physical accident, and it was determined that I needed to have a surgery, and it was the first surgery I've ever had in my life, and I was going to need it fairly soon. And I remember like around like as all this is happening, we're having all this conflict. The idea had come up that, well, maybe we can find you like a separate apartment to live in, and it dawned on me it dawned on me that I was going to need physical support after the surgery. And that's the surgery is actually what kept us together longer. I said to him, like, look, I said, I know that things aren't great, but like, I need you. Like, I don't know who else is going to take care of me, like post surgery. So that kept us together. And then not long after that, we actually moved across country and moved states. My hope, after all that was said and done, like leaving that state and moving to a whole other state, I think my hope was that by changing scenery and changing just everything in our lives, that maybe something would change. And then I think we were in that new state for about 6 months before something else really blew up. And it wasn't just him. It also involved his family. His family was also quite psychologically abusive towards me and really disrespectful. So there was a big blow up with the family. And I realized that this was never going to change. I realized that I was going to have to be the one to break the pattern and to break us. And that's what I did. So the exit was like years in the making. It was definitely a good solid 2 to 3 years of just like cognitive dissonance, being miserable, like, making concessions for his behavior. And of course, there's confusion. So you're like, am I making the right decision or not about what to do? It's very messy and traumatizing, and confusing. So it was a long time to walk away.
Were you afraid to leave? Afraid in any kind of way of him, of his family, of just fear?
I was never afraid of him, definitely not in the physical sense. He never physically hurt me. That was one thing I never felt scared about. And I never felt like my life was in danger. I think I was afraid of the unknown. I think that, well, not only that, I mean, that's one factor, but really, really a big factor was just the timing of the times that we find ourselves in. Like, I knew that we were, as a country, as a society, like in the middle of a housing crisis. Now we're in the middle of also a cost of living crisis. You could have a whole other podcast about like women's inequality and how, we really haven't progressed that much, but when you look at wages, I mean, that was a big factor, like, because there was a big financial change in my life when I met him. It wasn't something like I planned, but he made a lot more money than I did. And when we moved states, I was actually still unemployed. And it took me a little bit of time. Like it took me a little while to move out of the second house that he bought, because I needed to find a job that paid me enough so that I could move out and live somewhere and pay my bills. So it was, I don't know if you call it fear. I mean, it's just like the reality of like financial situations, but yeah, I guess in a way I was like, and I remember like saying to him towards the end, that I was afraid, I guess, by walking away, that I was going to somehow fall through the cracks, if that makes sense.
Yeah. 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 It's a traumatizing, traumatic experience. And trying to resolve this and that and the confusion, it's overwhelming. And we kind of don't realize that we're in trauma, but also it's all consuming. It's a really intense stress, anxiety. There's no word for it, really. Anxiety and
Mm-mm,
stress. We all know what that is.
mm-mm.
This is beyond, super beyond. So you got away, you moved out, and then what?
Yeah, so I moved out. I did get away. And I guess in one hand, I am lucky in the sense that because we didn't get married, like there wasn't all this like legal stuff to work through. It was just, material loss and, like loss of a home and a yard for my dog and things like that. But so I got a job, and the job actually came along with housing. So it seemed like a miracle. And like as you and I have spoken, the job ended up being a nightmare as well. But I was in that job for almost 2 years. And I've only recently finally gotten away from that job. So it's been about 2 months since I left that job, 2 months since I left that state. So I left the state, the one that I moved with him to, and I'm right now temporarily with a family member. And that's where I've been the last 2 months, just with some family and just focused on my health and healing and what it is that I want to do next.
Do you have anything you could say was the most significant light bulb that went off in you that was the bridge out?
It was that last really big blow up with him and his family involved. And I realized on a gut level, I'd been through years of, like I said, psychological abuse from him and his family. And I'd been taking it and taking it and taking the damage. And I think, hoping things would get better and hoping things would change. But when this particular last blow up happened, I just knew that I was never going to be respected. And the fact that if he'd been like a normal human being partner, this is a situation where he should have defended me because I was thrown under the bus for a mistake that one of his family members made. And this was a situation where he had kind of done this before, but not to this extent. And the fact that him and the rest of the family were willing to just throw me under the bus, like that was really it. I just knew that it was never going to change.
Right. And that kind of realization, I'm sensing the way you're saying this, brings with it power to do something different. Like that energy to do something different, energy, inspiration to like, this isn't going to change. And we kind of, in a way, realize I'm on my own. This is up to me. Something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And at the same time, it's like, it's powerful and it's also really scary because you're basically looking into the abyss, and going like, I don't know what's going to happen when I jump into the abyss or jump over or whatever, but I just knew, I just knew that was it. And yeah, walking away was the only, I had no idea how it was going to work out, but I knew that walking away was like the only option at that point.
And once you walked out, what kind of things did you find that were in my head? I just pictured like the fireman down below with the big net you get to jump into. Something catches us. We are buoyed back up. We find support and answers. And where did you start to see that or find that? Or do you remember a big, oh, wow, there's something there to hold me up. Let me keep, pulling this thread and following that.
I don't know that I definitely didn't feel that right away. I think that ultimately, philosophically, at least, like I've been through like a lot in my life. And I think that one of the things that I've had no choice but to do is to depend on my bravery. So I depended and I still depend on my bravery now. That's like my philosophical perspective. From like a practical perspective, like grounded, like with other human beings, there have just been those people along the way that have helped me to stay up. And, the women that were at the job, one of the jobs I actually had two jobs once I left him, them being a support for me. At the time before I found you and your work, I had a long time therapist from the previous city I lived in, and we did cognitive behavioral therapy. We also did a little bit of EMDR to help with processing traumas. But I think I've told you this, but there was something that was missing. And there was this moment where I was talking to my therapist on the phone, and I was kind of pleading with her because I was really having trouble getting any kind of relief from just the years of trauma. And I was still in this job that I transitioned to from living with him. Like it was also continuing to cause trauma. So I was really having trouble healing. I was really having trouble feeling good on a daily basis. I actually said to her, I said, do you know someone? I said, I mean, you're helping me, but I'm not getting any relief. I'm really just feeling bad all the time. Is there someone that like the words that came out of my mouth were, there's someone that you know that specializes in, say, narcissistic abuse. And she's like, no, I don't. But, and that's when she introduced EMDR. We did that. And then it was like, I do believe in manifesting and intuition and things like that. And so I remember, I think it was Facebook or maybe Instagram. I don't know. There was this particular slide. I remember it specifically that you have out there. And it spoke specifically to like getting this person out of your bones. And that's what really spoke to me, because it felt like, oh my, it's so like this experience is so deep inside of you. Like it's in your brain, it's in your bones. And that's what led me to you to do our coaching sessions. And so, yeah, I guess it's never felt, I can't say that I've felt really very comfortable most of my life, because I've been on my own so much. So I can't even really say that like I have this feeling of having like a strong safety net, but it's been me putting one foot in front of the other and sort of meeting people along the way that end up helping me, like you and my therapist and friends along the way.
So how's the future looking? It's different. It's better. You're glad you're away?
Yeah. So I don't know what the future holds. It still feels kind of weird some days. It still feels like I'm looking to an abyss, but I definitely feel finally being physically removed from the state where all of this horrible stuff happened. Like I'm finally in a place where I've had a chance to healing. I'm not exhausted like I used to be. I really focus on my nutrition and eating well and taking care of myself. And so I'm starting to have hope again. My future feels, I don't know what it looks like, but it feels lighter, and it feels, even in these past few weeks, like I have hope coming back.
That's it. We cannot do anything without hope. Yeah. Thank you so much. Is there anything you want to tell people? Anything else?
I hope that I know that for me, it's been so helpful to not only find you and your perspective, which is different than anyone else that I've encountered so far, but just reading your articles and listening to your podcast. And I did a while ago. I bought your book, Breaking It with Evil. It's been so helpful to hear other people share their stories. So my hope is that by me being transparent, it helps somebody else feel less alone. Because I think that's one of the hardest part about this experience, is that it's so deeply lonely. And then the last thing that comes up for me is, we've briefly talked about this, just touched on this in one of our sessions, is like, I have this word of evolution coming up for me when I think about all this, and I know that you've kind of mentioned before that, basically like part of this experience may be that, that we're pushing evolution along, right? Whether it's in the sense of like having more awareness that these people are walking among us, calling it what it is. I hope that's what happens, because I do feel like we need to evolve. I just, so I just hope that it's helpful, and I hope that this conversation contributes to our collective evolution.
I am certain it will. It's really fantastic what you've shared. Without a doubt, know that each different listener will find something that will move their own experience along, help them recover, discover something, encourage them. And that is the hope. That is the point of doing all of this. I love the human connection. Like I feel your life. I'm feeling along with you as we're talking, and anyone listening also. I hope it's a place people can get support and ideas and relief and breakthroughs. And I just really want to thank you, Phoebe, so much for being part of it.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to me, Jennifer Smith of True Love Scam Recovery, the podcast Narcissistic Abuse Unwound, and my wonderful guest today, Phoebe. If you would like to be a guest on the podcast, please email me, jennifer@truelovescam.com, and we will get it together and make it happen. You will get to be anonymous, absolutely, 100%. Phoebe is not the name of the person I interviewed today. And Jennifer Smith is not my name. And this is logical. It's for safety. It's for privacy. Thank you so much for being here. Jennifer Smith, True Love Scam Recovery, Narcissistic Abuse Unwound, sending you all good things.